All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So just as a reminder, right, we're gonna not have class Friday or Monday, so extra long weekend. There will be a playlist, right? So I already made the playlist. I'll send it out immediately after class, so you guys can watch that at your leisure, really anytime over the next week. The playlist is about an hour and 40 minutes, right, which is two 50-minute classes. It's mostly my videos, but then I did include like some, more interesting, visually pleasing, infographic kind of videos as well in there. So please watch those. We will have a Kahoot in class immediately upon returning on Wednesday. That will be about the playlist videos. So as a way to ensure that you guys watch it, and also as a way to reward those people that watched it and absorbed the material the best. So, all right, with that little bit of housekeeping out of the way, let's jump into our notes today. So we talked about supply and demand, right? We talked about labor demand and interest rate demand, so on and so forth. We kind of, folded chapter 4 into the last half of chapter 3. That being said, in this announcement, I'll also put a link to the current class playlist, and I added videos for chapter 4 on the current class playlist, so feel free to peruse that at your leisure. But we talked about supply and demand, right? And last class we talked about simultaneous shifts and how, when there's two shifts happening, we don't know what happens with one of the economic indicators. And this is related to that conclusion. So the determination of whether or not you can figure out if there's an ambiguous or unambiguous change in something like a quantity, right? It not only has to do with the size of the shifts, but it also has to do with the slope of the curve, right? So when we're talking about demand, there's lots of different demand curve not shapes, but there's lots of different demand curve possibilities, right? We could have something, for the most part, we end up, we usually graph things that have a very, standard kind of slope of -1, right? But if we were to, have a very steep slope, this would still be a demand curve. So that's also a demand curve. And then if we were to have a very shallow slope, this would also be a demand curve. So we're going to talk about the different slopes that demand takes and the impact that that has ultimately on total revenue. So when we're talking about elasticity, what are we talking about? So we're going to zoom into price elasticity of demand in a second, but right now let's just zoom out and just figure out this word elasticity. So elasticity is an economic concept that measures the responsiveness of our quantity, or one variable. So we just, since this is going to be of a variable. Now for this instance, right, it's going to be quantity, to changes in another variable. And that's going to be price. So we're going to be looking at how do price changes impact quantity. And so when we specifically look at price impacting quantity, that is known as a price elasticity. So this is measuring how much the quantity changes when the price changes. And then zooming in even further, price elasticity of demand, also known as PED. This is measuring how much our quantity demanded changes when our price changes. Questions on the notion of elasticity, and then our sub-definitions of price elasticity and price elasticity of demand. Okay. So when we're talking about, let's go to price elasticity because it makes sense to have a little bit of specificity here, right? So when we're talking about this, if we wanted to put this in a equation format, right? If we wanted to figure out, okay, what's my elasticity? We could say, so it's how much our Q changes. So it's a percentage change. So triangle is our mathematical notation for change. So percentage change in Q when our price changes. So now we kind of have to unpack this percentage change thing, right? So back in the day, when we did percentage changes, right, we typically had some sort of, you had some old weight of, 120 pounds, and then you have some new weight of, 80 pounds, and you're wanting to figure out the percentage change from the old to the new. So this is a directional percentage change, right? And so for this one, we know the way to do this is just our new minus old over old times 100, right? Pretty straightforward. We've been doing this kind of math for decades now. The problem is when we're dealing with economics, and specifically when we're dealing with supply and demand graphs, we are not always marching along in the direction of greater quantity, right? So when we're talking about demand and we're asked about the elasticity between these 2 points, we actually don't know if it's, we don't know if we're saying the elasticity from this point to this point or the elasticity from this point to this point. And so as a result of that ambiguity, the way that we do a bidirectional percentage change is as follows. So we're not going to do this new minus old over old system ever in this class. We are going to be using what is called the midpoint method. So the midpoint method, instead of being new minus old over old, right? Now we have, so instead of new minus old, let's talk about, so we're going to have between quantity 1 and quantity 2. And so now we're going to say quantity 1 minus quantity 2 divided by the midpoint, quantity 1 plus quantity 2 divided by 2. And then we times this whole thing by 100. And that's going to get us the proper percentage change for the remainder of this class. Questions on our midpoint method for evaluating percentage changes?